Geopolitics and Empire is joined by Riggs Eckelberry, who's a nationally renowned entrepreneur dedicated to revolutionizing the water industry, which has reached a critical breaking point in recent years, despite being essential to the planet's survival. As the founding CEO of OriginClear, that's OriginClear.com, Riggs has developed innovative solutions to help businesses face rising water bills by tapping into new investment markets. He's even pioneering the development of water stablecoins, a cryptocurrency backed by water assets. It's great to have you on Geopolitics and Empire, Riggs.
Hervé, it's such an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, we talked not long ago on my TNT radio show, and I think this will be an even more in-depth treatment about water and the work that you're doing. I think it's a big and important topic, and I think I need to dedicate more time on the podcast to discussing energy, resources, minerals, water. And I do believe that access to clean water is an increasing issue. In Mongolia, where I used to live, we'd get our water from wells. We'd have to filter and boil it constantly. That was the way of life. Just an interesting anecdote. Last year, I was in my home of Croatia, and the clean water demand just keeps rising. And I noticed they cut our water for a while because they had to install these massive water pumps in their neighborhood that I learned later run on diesel fuel. So every day they got to be feeding diesel fuel to pump the water to our homes in Croatia because it's mountainous. And then you think of how much energy is required just to get that water going. And then here in Mexico, we get our drinking water, a lot of us, delivered. So think of what happens if the system collapses or stops. I mean, this is very fragile, and the cost keeps rising. So maybe, to identify the problems first, Riggs, what can you tell us about the water problems, the issues, and, as well, especially related to clean water?
Yes. Well, the golden age of water was really symbolized by that massive New York, it's called the Delaware system, which is a massive water aqueduct and piping system that was built by Italian masons back in the early part of the 20th century. And that New York was famous for its clean water, just beautifully pure. And there were a lot of projects like that. This was the era of Hoover Dam, for example, giant central projects. Unfortunately, starting about, post-war, about 1960, that stopped, and we started getting into just maintaining what was there. Operation and maintenance costs for our infrastructure have risen steadily since 1961, while the actual replacement or expansion of those assets and modernization has not been happening. And it's now showing up, in these situations like Flint, Michigan, and I could name half a dozen right off the bat. But we still think water is kind of being taken care of okay, and it's just not so.
Riots across Europe, unprecedented food and energy inflation, increasing military conflict around the globe, and a rising digital police state. The fourth turning is here, and so is the Expat Money Summit. The free online event, expatmoneysummit.com, is back and will help you navigate these turbulent times. Featuring dozens of renowned experts such as Dr. Ron Paul, international man Doug Casey, Jim Rogers, and Mark Faber, the summit will reveal how you can reclaim your freedom abroad, reduce your tax bill, protect your wealth, obtain multiple citizenships and residencies, become part of a like-minded global community, and more. Founder of expatmoney.com, Mikhail Thorup, will be your guide on this journey to protect yourself from economic collapse, World War III, authoritarian Western regimes, and Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. Simply go to expatmoneysummit.com and enter your email to reserve a free ticket to the event. Do it now. That's across the board. I mean, I think that's great how you identified that. We have the same problem with electricity. I've had experts on either my show or podcast who talk about, the electric grid. It's the same situation. It's just being maintained. There's no more modernization, upgrading, development. And the same thing can happen to the electric grid as it can with the water in the United States. And what can you tell us about, for example, there's talk about water running out, scarcity, what's going on there?
Yes, we're overpumping water to a great degree. We've heard a lot about the Colorado watershed going down into all the western states and creating droughts. but what's less known is, for example, the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the central United States, which is much of our produce is produced in the middle of the country, is running down as well. I think it's at least 150 feet down from where it was, and it takes hundreds of years. Replenishing groundwater is not, you don't just pump it into the aquifer. It has to seep in, and if you're overdrawing it, it's going to cause a catastrophe. I recently saw that I covered this on I do as you know, a weekly CEO briefing every Thursday night on OriginClear.com. And I covered what's going on in South Africa, where wealthier people are paying money to have their own bore wells dug, and they're getting water. It's costing, let's say $5,000. But the real problem is now everybody's overpumping the water in South Africa, and it's not being centrally managed. There are models for good water management, but that's not being done in America. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think it's like Mead out in Vegas. I used to go to Vegas often because I used to have family there, and you'd notice the levels going down. And I'm frank with my views that I don't believe in the theory of man-made global warming, but there are people that go to one extreme where they say, it's all a lie, and we've got all this endless energy. I don't think that's true either. That as you kind of laid out, that people are overusing, even if it's renewable, we can overuse the renewable resources, and then we're out of water. And it's the same principle here in Mexico. You just mentioned South Africa. People who have money dig wells on their property and get access to it, but still water quantity is becoming an issue. What about the quality of water? That you mentioned Flint, but what's the trajectory or trend? How bad is the quality of water getting?
Yes, and there's a very good organization, Environmental Water Group, EWG.org. If you go to ewg.org/tapwater, you can put in your zip code if you're in America, and it will tell you, okay, here's what the regulations are. And I would say virtually all of the locations are compliant because they have to be. But then it shows how it's, 5,000 times the level of what science since then has determined. And the regulations haven't kept up. And here's the biggest reason why. The municipalities, the utilities have a hard enough time keeping up with even minimal demands for example, the arsenic levels in California were made more challenging, and that just became a major issue for the utilities in California. There's 150,000 water utilities in America, some of them very small, and they're just not equipped to deal with the realities of modern toxic chemicals, including one of the toughest ones of all, which is Roundup, glyphosate, which I believe now more than 90% of Americans have glyphosate in their system to some degree. And your system can support a certain amount. I had my levels tested a while ago, and because I ate organic, I was at the level of a European, right? In other words, not much. But it adds up. And one of our partners is actually an MD in Wisconsin. And he sees farmers come off their farms with glioblastomas, with brain tumors caused directly by oversaturation of the Roundup. So this is a real problem, and it's not being filtered out. You can obviously remedies at home. You can and should do that. We can discuss that briefly. But what it really comes down to is, why is the system overloaded? And if nobody's going to pay for it to be built up, then what's the remedy? And that's where we come in.
Yeah, just real quick, if you could mention them regarding the remedies at home regarding if people want to protect themselves from the glyphosate and stuff like that.
I'd be happy to just cover that briefly. First of all, I'll just take the example of, we moved into our condo. This is behind me is Clearwater, Florida, and we escaped LA in June 2020 and came here. We're super happy. The west coast of Florida, around the Tampa latitude, is just fine. It's wonderful. Anyway, so what we decided to do we were given some advice. We went ahead with a whole condo ultrafiltration system. Not expensive. It takes things down to 0.2 microns. which takes care of things like the forever chemicals, right? Does not take care of the glyphosate because that's smaller than that. Under the sink, we installed a reverse osmosis system with a remineralization step and a pH rectifier so that it would remain, it tastes smooth. It's got that high pH mouthfeel to it. And that is absolutely pure. RO is as good as distillation. It completely takes care of everything out. Now, by the way, reverse osmosis as an industrial scale process is very wasteful because there's a tremendous amount of reject water comes out as brine, and that is part of the drought problem. But I won't get into that. So on a spot basis, RO makes sense, as we did with the under sink system. And then for our shower heads, my naturopathic doctor advised me to get a shower filter that was designed to take out the glyphosate, because he said that, your skin is absorbing this stuff in the shower all the time. And that the one we got, I don't represent the company, but I got it on Amazon, Max Pro Max 1 is one that does the job. So that combination of three things, and you're pretty much set. And it wasn't too expensive.
Yeah, I used to have I may have even had that shower filter, but I left and came back to Mexico, and I think I need to. I hadn't put back the filter, so I got to get back on that. And then, what about cost? Again, in general, of water, my guess is that it's in general increasing. Here in Mexico, the utility it's a public utility. The cost is still pretty low. I guess there's a slow trend of increase, but the cost of the water we purchase, the clean water, from the private companies, it's absolutely skyrocketing in terms of Mexican pesos. And then just in the U.S., I mean, inflation and the cost of clean water. How's that looking?
Well, first of all, water rates have been skyrocketing at far greater rate than inflation. So over a period of time, I think 10 years, it's like triple inflation. So what's happening is because the utilities are underfunded, they basically lost access to federal funds, which were generous in the 1970s as grants. They basically dwindled down to almost nothing and became loans. So that wasn't very helpful. And then the states may or may not have the funds to do things. Of course, there's a bigger problem, which is as you get expansion of people and industry and agriculture, you want to build new sites. But here in my county, it's completely built up. Where are you going to put it? There's the NIMBY problem. And so as a result, even if they had the money, they wouldn't be able to expand. Okay. The water rates have been increasing. And there's a very high percentage of utilities customers that are either running behind on their water bills or delinquent, which doesn't help the utility. And eventually they have to cut them off. And now the person who got cut off is reduced to buying water the way you do it in Mexico. And that's much more expensive. So it's a vicious circle. It doesn't work. Our solution is very different, because industry and agriculture make up 90% of all water demand. And we're talking about freshwater demand, but also the demand for sewage treatment, which is just as important. You got to treat the dirty water too, right? Otherwise it comes back to haunt you. So now the ratio between industry and agriculture varies. In the United States, it's roughly equal. Place like Somalia, it's 90% agriculture, 10% industry. But and I'm just talking rough numbers here. The stats are on World in Data if people want to take a look. Freshwater demand, just look under that, you'll see all the stats. So 90% of the demand is industry and agriculture. Well, if you have an underfunded program, and you don't have money for it, if you're overspending on your credit cards, then stop spending, right? In this case, let's reduce the load. Let's take the burden off these central systems. And the good news is that it works very well for industry and agriculture to do their own treatment, to become self-reliant. it works out very well. Number one, they can lock in water rates with a long-term service contract. So now they're not at the whim of the utility. Number two, they can recycle. They can get more than one turn out of the water, which reduces their water bill. And in places like California, that's huge. I mean, I know of residential users in California, they have a $12,000 a month water bill. Now, big house, but still, it's a lot of money. And the third thing is, which is less obvious, is they have less interference from the city or county because they're meeting a requirement and they're recycling, and then whatever's left over, they're just dumping into the groundwater, fully treated, and everybody's happy. So that is decentralized water treatment, self-reliant water treatment. And I've been talking about this since 2016, when Lux Research came out with a webinar that documented the rise of decentralization and the stats behind it. And I became very excited about it. I started writing articles in water trades, and I was kind of a prophet in the desert for a long, long time. Now it's accepted. So in 2018, we decided OriginClear, because we incubate businesses. So in 2018, we created a business called Modular Water Systems, which is essentially a downscaling of the utility grade water systems into a box that can go into a brewery, car dealership, RV campground, housing development, etc., and just drop it in. They just have to have a pad, plumbing, electricity, and the thing comes in, gets dropped. We have some videos that demonstrate this. Unbelievable. In 6 hours, the thing's done. It's fully self-contained. That's a necessary ingredient, obviously, for decentralization, because you got to have the tech. And then secondly, we innovated during COVID something called water on demand, because the space we work in, small to medium businesses, does not have the capital that PepsiCo has. And the big corporations have done just fine in the last 3 years, but smaller businesses, they have to pay attention. And so water on demand basically lets them sign a service contract and not pay the capital expense for the water system. And what we put in place was basically a system a lot like oil wells, where they have these master limited partnerships. And investors, regular investors like you and me, can go into a master limited partnership and receive royalties. In the energy space, it's tax advantaged. We make it advantaged a different way, because we give because the energy advantage is only in energy. The tax advantage is only in energy. So what we do is we use the same structure when we add a big equity bonus to participate in OriginClear and water on demand. So long story short, water is now coming out of government monopoly and is becoming a private activity, funded by investors, mostly accredited investors, although from time to time we have a crowdfunding initiative, and going out to companies that want to do this and want the technology, but also want the capital help. And that's what we're doing. We're very excited about it. We're ramping up water on demand with acquisitions. And it's an interesting space because we're not the only ones. This concept of water as a service is not new. In fact, one of the longtime players is now known as Seven Seas, and they do desalination plants for entire islands on a private metered basis. But here's the difference. They're funded by Morgan Stanley Capital Partners, or rather Morgan Stanley Infrastructure Partners is the correct term. Another company in the space is called Cambrian, very good company. They're funded by venture capital. So not open to regular investors. We have decided to focus on the regular investor. And what we find, and this is true in America, but it's true in a lot of places, people who have a little bit of money, but not a lot, don't know what to do with their money. Stock market, I have no idea. Is it going to go down, up? The other day, gold shot up. I didn't expect that, right? So, and then XRP, poof. But we're not in that loop. We're not getting that pre-IPO stuff that the favored people get. And so what we decided to do is, as water is becoming a unicorn type space, I mean, literally in May, a unicorn was created with some MIT technology. So it's becoming a billion dollar private companies are starting to happen again in water. So as that's happening, we want to make it possible for everyday investors to make an investment and get a good return, generational return on their money, just like an oil well.
Yeah, and this is like the free market at work. When the government fails, you just take matters into your own hands. You decentralize. And before getting to what I also think is interesting, the crypto part, the water stablecoins. If we could just go back for a moment. I'm still slightly confused. This is outside my domain, and there's people that listen that have small businesses around the U.S. or the world. I've been the Greater Reset, for example. Derek Bros and John Bush in Texas, Derek Bros down here in Mexico, and there's a lot of people forming these, entire parallel communities and structures and farms and businesses all over the place. And if you could just explain a little more how your decentralized private modular system works. For example, if you've got a business somewhere in the US and you're having these water issues with the public utility, does your system still use the public utility, or is it completely cut off? Does that business then not need to use the US government's water supply? How does that work?
The default is to use the central water supply, and that's just a small water pipe. You're not digging a big sewage system. Some people can opt to dig a well, and that's fine too. So the question about the incoming water can be resolved either by just continuing to buy water from the city, which 99% of our customers do because it's easy. But then you can always have your well and eat it too. That was terrible. But you can have a well. The important part is sewage. Why? Sewage travels on high pressure lines. It does not travel on gravity lines. So that's what makes it so expensive. And if you've heard in the news over the years about water main breaks, well, water mains only break when there's pressure. A regular gravity-fed system, there's nothing going on. It just flows and there's no pressure. But when there's pressure, then you get corrosion, whatever, and it bursts. So when that bursts, that reduces the ability of the city to process that sewage from whatever neighborhood it was coming from, and that's a big part of the problem for them. The network is degrading. A big part of our business at Modular Water Systems, for instance, is the strangest thing. But there's these, and you've mentioned pump stations, right? Pump stations are a critical part of the grid. And because every time you change levels, you got to have a pump station. Generally, pump stations are for fresh water, potable water. Lift stations are for sewage, although it's roughly interchangeable. But the point I'm making is they have usually been built with concrete, steel, or fiberglass, and they degrade. And now you have the water seeping into the underground aquifer, which loses revenue in case of fresh water, and it also, in the case of sewage, it pollutes it. So the solution is this: become self-sufficient on sewage treatment. It's relatively simple. We are seeing an explosion of that happening in, for example, in North Texas right now. There's a huge population boom post-COVID, and all the way to the Oklahoma border. And they're racing ahead of the utilities capacity. And so we're putting in these containerized systems. And in fact, there's a great video on the OriginClear YouTube with featuring Jimmy Moon up near, I think it was called Munson Point, up near Oklahoma. And it shows this cool 40-foot container that just got dropped in, boom, and just does it. And you got more. If you got more houses, you just put more containers, right? So that's becoming a solution where there's a lot of expansion. A major factor, we think, in decentralized water is going to be deglobalization. We know that's happening. Already there's a lot of demand. I've heard that, for example, unemployment is virtually zero in places like Tijuana because there's so much demand for labor. There's also in that area, I've heard of about 1 million square feet of deficit of manufacturing and warehousing space. That's going to continue. So northern Mexico, southern Texas are going to be very strong for these businesses that come back because, the China Southeast Asia experiment worked well at a time when we didn't have a lot of automation. And we had a lot of people willing to work for not much money to assemble, stuff from chips to parts to whatever. But now we have automation, and a modern factory can run with very few people. What's going to be coming over the next 20 to 25 years is this inflow of state-of-the-art automated factories, and they'll have to have integrated water treatment because they're going to overtake the water system. I have a good friend who has a water concession in the state of Puebla, and he tells me his customers are the Anglos, right? Because those are the ones that by corporate mandate from the 50 states are required to do it. Even in Mexico, the local Mexicans, let the river run in rainbows, shall we say? But this is going to be remedied by the fact that it will be American companies that establish manufacturing in Mexico, and there will be a gradual move towards things being cleaned up. The river Atoyac, which is the one in Puebla, is going to be cleaned up. Mexico is moving towards that. It's actually, as you know, a great economy, has a great future ahead of it. And I think it's going to be even more so. So these deglobalization forces, I think, are going to drive a lot of self-reliant water treatment. And as you say, possibly, drawing your own water from the ground, but for sure, treating your own dirty water.
Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen. Some of the most successful empires were those that offered people a reason to come, often lower taxes and the prospect of citizenship. In ancient times, empires would say foreigners can become one of us and prosper through business and trade. Throughout history, people have gravitated to jurisdictions that have given them the best conditions to do business. So if you run a business, you should consider Nomadcapitalist because they help entrepreneurs and investors relocate to parts of the world where they can keep more of their wealth. They literally wrote the book on it, the best-selling Nomadcapitalist. Find it on Amazon. If you're an entrepreneur or investor and believe you're paying too much in tax, or if you'd like to get a second passport or a third passport like I have, to expand your options and not have to be reliant on one government, there are legal ways to do this. Nomadcapitalist has been assisting over 1,000 clients for the last 10 years. You can check out their 2,000 plus educational YouTube videos and nearly 2,000 blogs. Just go to nomadcapitalist.com, learn how they can help you legally reduce your tax bill, expand your options globally, and navigate the algorithm ghetto.
I mean, what you said was also fascinating. I'm tracking and seeing that here. I mean, we got Musk was recently in Nuevo León. They're going to bring in Tesla factory there. Other Asian corporations, companies coming in, China, I don't remember. Further EV factories. There were recently semiconductor, heads of semiconductor industries, I think Korea and elsewhere, coming in to decide whether it's viable for them to open up in Mexico. So there's a lot, and the foreign FDI is increasing. It might even hit a record. So that's all coming in, as you said. And I was reading as well that there was an article here in Mexico saying that they don't have enough workers. There's not enough workers or not enough qualified workers. So again, that just speaks to what you're saying. Economically, Mexico is on the way up. The issue is that still the security issue. What's also increasing, which is depressing for me, the number of highway bandits, especially here in Jalisco, where I am, where all of these these industries, the semis that are transporting stuff, they're getting held up and the goods taken. So that is a problem. But apart from the security issue, hopefully that doesn't get worse. Definitely the FDI is coming in and things are looking economically up in Mexico. And maybe they then you mentioned XRP Ripple, which jumped the other day because it was not ruled, I think, security. So it was judged in favor of XRP Ripple. Unfortunately, on the other hand, LBRY library Odyssey, LBRY, they ruled against them, and I've interviewed the head of Jeremy Kaufman on my TNT radio show, the head of Odyssey, and this video goes out to Odyssey, and they just said that they'll be shutting down LBRY. They're separate, Odyssey and LBRY, but I don't know what's going to happen to Odyssey. I hope it still continues, because YouTube just gave me a strike on my past interview, and so we need platforms like LBRY and Odyssey. But you talk about water stable coins. This is interesting. What's going on here?
Okay, so let's set the stage here. There is no worldwide water market, unlike pork bellies, or other commodities. There's no worldwide trading of water. The price of water is incredibly diverse. The cheapest Colorado River water is around $25 an acre foot. That's 1 acre, 1 foot deep. About a household of 4 for a year uses an acre foot of water. So $25 is 4 households. The most expensive is what San Diego's paying on the margin, which is $1,350 for the same acre foot. That's a huge differential. So what do you do when you're, the whole reason for commodity markets is to seek stability by buying future contracts, hedging your costs. But right now, if I'm in Northern California with skyrocketing prices of water, I can't hedge with Singapore water. It's impossible. Doesn't happen. Well, what we realized was, as we're rolling out this water on demand concept, now you have business customers paying by the gallon. And it's a much more even, because it's a commercial process that's roughly the same everywhere, and it's processing the same water. And there's small variations in toxicity levels. But in general, you've got a pretty stable price for water, and every single gallon has money attached to it. Back in 2018, I was an early pioneer back then of something called Water Chain, which was a blockchain water product token. But we ran up against the fact, again, that where's the water price? There's no water economy beyond local. So all water is local, because you're not going to send a pipeline from the Carolinas to New York. It's too expensive, right? For the price of water, even when it's a lot, because it's one of the cheapest things around. So what we realized was, as we grow the water on demand network, we will have an increasing amount of water being processed, and the stakeholders are getting their royalties. And those royalties right now are being paid by ACH, automated clearinghouse, because it's relatively simple. But we said, well, why don't we instead, let's say that you, Hervoye, go ahead and invest in a piece of water on demand. One of our we have a series of funds that we create. So you have a piece of one, and now you're going to start getting your percentage. Well, how about you instead get a token that is your contract and all the future revenue from that contract, and automatically there is payments happening. That means you can transfer that contract, and that now starts to eventually create a marketplace where people can trade these water tokens. And the key to getting there, and which is why we're not doing it right now, is we need to replicate the water on demand model in other regions. As we perfect it here and get momentum and so forth, we then want to do a deal with a financial player in the Middle East, let's say Dubai, in Singapore and Tokyo, et cetera, to essentially replicate what we have. And now we'll have carbon copies of water on demand throughout the world. And it's going to take a decade. It's not going to happen overnight. But it's one of those things, I was up in high tech for years before this, and this network effect is real. The value of the network increases by the square of each node, right? It's geometrical progression. So the more of these we create, the more this de facto standard of the water on demand royalty, which we've named. We have dollar symbol H2O is the name of it, and it's kind of like a digital bond in a way. It is a security, no question about it. We're not saying it's not, because you're receiving dividend income. And no bones about it, and that's less of an issue in non-U.S. jurisdiction. But if you're not fighting being a security, there's no issue. The SEC will find you're a security, be regulated as a security. Everything's great. So that's the plan. As I say, we don't have a problem right now. We have, I think our total OriginClear investor base of regular repeat investors is about, 300 or 400. So it's not a lot of people, even as they're being converted over to water on demand. But when it gets to 1,000, 10,000, it gets to multinational replicants of water on demand, eventually we will have a worldwide water market. And that will be a stunning development, in my opinion.
You answered a number of my questions there. And so, pun intended, I'm stealing this from you. We've covered sort of the waterfront. And is there anything, that I haven't brought up that's also, an important or pertinent issue that you'd like to get across?
No, I think we've done a good job. The main thing to remember is that the U.S. does not recycle water. And that's a major, major flaw. And it's caused by the same problem that the energy grid has, which is it's a one-way system. The dirty water goes to the city, and the city treats it and dumps it clean. I'm not saying it's not treated, but it's been wasted. And water is becoming much, much too precious to do that to. And so recycling is critical. The only way it's going to happen is if we modernize. Israel has very high recycling rates, almost 90%. But they're able to do that because, number one, they're command economy. What they say goes. It's very, very homogenous. Secondly, it's relatively new water treatment systems. The U.S. is not in that place. So we're not going to rebuild these things anytime soon. The way to do it is small is beautiful. Do it one place at a time. And then it's economically rationalized by, hey, I've got a water bill. I'm going to reduce it by sprinkling my lawn with my leftover water. And now you've got really water independence. It's actually super exciting. It's in the same vein as the energy thing, but here's the big difference. The energy utilities are resisting solar and trying to tax it and trying to have fees and so forth. The water industry is delighted to let industry and agriculture do their own treatment. They're actually driving it. A lot of large companies, PepsiCo, for example, has committed to 80% reuse of their water. And that, great. That means they have to have their own plant, and the water districts are happy with that. So this is a golden era, really, where the utilities are very happy with the unburdening that goes on. And once you unburden, now you can start helping you and me, the regular people. In Ireland, fresh water is free. It should be free in America too, and it can be if all the budgets are devoted to the people and not industry and agriculture. So that's really our mission. I would love it if any of your listeners want to join. Simply go to OriginClear.com. There's an Invest Now button. You will get to talk very quickly to the co-creator of Water on Demand, Ken Berenger. We're still very early, so you can still talk to him directly. And it's a fascinating briefing, and I strongly recommend it.
Very, very cool. Again, the links will be in the description, OriginClear.com. People can go there. And as well, you've got, as you mentioned, YouTube channel briefings. People can consume that content. And you're also appearing on podcasts as well. That list is there. So, what more can we say? Water, it's going to be very important from here on out. And thanks for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Yes, and I'd like to invite you and your listeners to sign up for my weekly CEO briefing every Thursday night. We're up to number 220. So probably less than you, but we are the most transparent public company in America, I believe. Join us every Thursday night, and it'll be a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.